like most, I guess, young men going into college, I was very interested in human performance. So how do we run faster and throw farther and jump longer? And I first went through kind of physiology training and then became a physical therapist. And it was when I was working in the hospital setting that I realized human performance is very different for older persons. It's not about necessarily high performance athletics, but it could be just simply, how do I get out of bed today and cross the room safely so I can stay living independently in my home instead of having to go to an institution where I need 24-hour care. And the notion is to compress the period of morbidity in life to the very end, right? So if we can extend our health span and have this very short period of disease, disability, and frailty, and then die shortly thereafter, I think that's what all of us want, right? We don't want to live longer sicker, but we'd like to live longer healthier and have a very brief period of kind of poor health at the end of life and then pass away. That's a good question. There are also organisms like clams that live for 200 years and different species that live for centuries. And I think we can learn a lot from those organisms. That's not what I do, but I have colleagues that are very interested in some of these species. There's also different versions of rodents, for example, that have very different lifespans. So a typical rat may live for 3 years, but there's a naked mole rat that lives for 30 years, and it's really interesting of what's the biology that determines that difference. We can learn from many different things, yeah. Sure. So a lot of our work in the biology of aging and understanding really, one, why we get older, and two, what's the link between aging and chronic disease. And chronic diseases ranging from, again, cardiovascular disease to Alzheimer's disease to osteoporosis to, you can name a list, of 100 things that are all chronic conditions, and aging by far is the #1 risk factor. So we've been very interested in understanding processes of aging and their link to disease. And in doing that work, a cellular process called senescence has become very interesting. And this is a phenomenon that was discovered by Len Hayflick in 1961, where he took the cells from the skin and put them in a dish and watched how they divided. And ultimately they stopped dividing, and that's a process called senescence. And it's a state of growth arrest, so the cells are no longer dividing or growing. And it's linked by some different biological features. And where it's been most studied is in the concept of cancer. So it's a way our body defends against the growth and the spread of tumors. Well, when we're younger, that's very important. And our body is able to get rid of those cells after they stop dividing, and it clears them probably through the immune system. But what's interesting is there's a process or a concept called antagonistic pleiotropy, where things that are very good for us when we're young can be very damaging as we get older. And these cells, these senescent cells, tend to start to accumulate in our different organs. And the cells themselves can be damaging because they no longer divide and replace damaged cells or tissue, so they accumulate. But what's really damaging is they secrete or release many toxic factors, so factors that cause inflammation or tissue degeneration. They kind of make the environment very toxic. And as those accumulate and as we get older, we can now link these bad cells and what they secrete to different conditions like diabetes, like osteoporosis, like pulmonary fibrosis, and even vascular problems and issues surrounding the heart. So we're starting to understand how these cells accumulate, cause damage, and that's one important step. But the really important step then is to say, if we get rid of those cells from an organism, does that have health benefits? And as you mentioned, in the past, I guess almost 5 years now, we've shown in one model system, a mouse that ages very fast, that if we remove those cells, we confer many health benefits. We prevent a number of different age-related conditions ranging from a hunchback to cataracts, and markedly improve the health and the performance of the mouse. More recently, just this year, our colleagues at Mayo Clinic were able to demonstrate that if you remove those cells from a totally normal aging mouse for kind of throughout adulthood, that you can extend lifespan by 20 or 30%. And some features of aging-related changes were prevented. So they had healthier looking kidneys, and they were more tolerant to certain stresses as well. So it's encouraging to see that, again, something that appears to extend health span by preventing the onset of aging-related conditions also translated into longer life. And you know, the animals even looked healthier. We've, since that time, been very interested in not just tricky genetic approaches to removing these cells, but are these cells druggable? And I repeatedly use the analogy of a rotten apple spoiling the cart. So we're really focused now on understanding what are features of that rotten brown apple skin that we can identify. And if we can identify unique features of those cells, it would be possible to deliver a drug specifically to them and drive their removal, or targeted clearance, if you will. So a lot of effort by many of my colleagues, in particular Jim Kirkland at Mayo Clinic, has really been focused on that. And we've had some success. And we've shown now in a couple of different systems that if we provide these drugs, we get pretty considerable health benefits. And it really opens the doors now to do some proof of concept trials in humans with these drugs. That's really the take-home point here, is this is a totally different way of approaching health. We think it's innovative and potentially very transformative. So if you think about it, if we were so fortunate to cure all cancers, just pretend for a second that we cured cancer, you would still die perhaps an early death due to cardiovascular disease. Or your last 10 years of life, you may still suffer from Alzheimer's disease. You may be immobile because you have severe arthritis. That's kind of discouraging. I'm not saying at all that we should stop focusing on cancer, but I'm saying that, you know, if we're so fortunate to prevent cancer or prevent cardiovascular disease or prevent Alzheimer's disease, there's a long list of other conditions that are going to take away the good years of our life that we have left. What we think is that if we understand the root cause of all these conditions, and I'm not saying that cellular senescence or senescent cells are the only cause, but they're one of the causes, that would be totally fundamental. Just think about it, if we could delay the onset of these diseases as a group, not just one of them, but all of them as a group, we'd markedly improve health span. Potentially, we're really very committed to the idea of extending healthy life. So this is the phase of life that we refer to as our health span, where we don't suffer from the chronic diseases, disability, and frailty. We may have chronic diseases, but they don't necessarily compromise our quality of life, so we're managing them very well.